The views and opinions expressed on Where Did the Road Go belong to the person speaking them. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of other people on the show or the show as a whole. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following amazing individuals: Greg Ross, Bill Illuminati, Allison Cook, Yvonne Williams, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight, for the first time ever, I have a combination of Mike Clelland. Say hi, Mike.
Hi there. I'm glad to be here.
And Marty Garza.
How you doing, Seriah? And how you doing, Mike? I'm glad to be here as well.
Mike almost wasn't here.
The internet was down all day. It was kind of a snowstorm, and it just knocked enough trees down, or maybe just one tree. It all took, so we didn't have internet access until like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. As we were trying to set it up to do it over your phone, all of a sudden 1 million messages from you came in saying that you didn't have internet.
Well, yeah, I got it now. So the gods are shining on us. Yes.
Yeah, let's hope it holds, and it doesn't just disappear.
Well, yeah, we'll find out. So
anyway, so tonight's show, I wanted the two of you on because the two of you know a good deal about the whole thing with Chris Bledsoe. Mike, you know Chris. Marty, you've said some very interesting things about Chris's work, and I know next to nothing about Chris Bledsoe, and initially dismissed him because of his connections to people like Lou Elizondo.
And I don't know, does he have a tight connection with Lou Elizondo?
Well, just that whole group of people, the whole disclosure thing. It may not have been Lou specifically. It just seemed like it was connected to stuff that I don't pay a lot of attention to, I guess is the way to put it.
Okay.
But you guys have convinced me I'm wrong. And
I'm not saying you're wrong, but yeah.
Well, no, wrong to not pay attention to him.
That connection came well after the his encounters, and he was sort of already somewhat on the map before Tom DeLonge and Lou Elizondo approached him.
Okay, all right. Well,
from my understanding,
right. Well, who wants to start by explaining who Chris is?
Yeah, why don't you do it? Because you have the Marty, you have the online version of it, and so I would get all mired down into
the personal aspect.
The personal aspect, yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean...
Oh, here, let me just... Marty, did you read his book?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good, gotcha.
The day it was published. It's a very long story, and we probably don't have enough time to go into the real details, finer details of it. But just to give you Seriah, to get you up to speed on the story, Chris was a contractor, very successful, was building something like 100 homes a year. And then he came down with Crohn's disease, and that had a very adverse effect on his ability to manage his business. At the same time, there was an economic downturn. He was not doing well. Kind of losing, his business, and then dealing with these physical ailments, and and this is sort of jumping. There are things that happened prior to this, but they don't necessarily affect the story moving forward. And this is like the Cliff Note version of it, but when he finally was starting to overcome some of this, and he got back to work a little bit. He had a small construction crew that aided him in a project. And when they completed the job, his employees asked to go on a fishing trip to the Cape Fear River. During that trip, I believe it was Chris's son, Chris Jr., and these, I think, 3 employees, possibly 4. Don't remember right at the
I think
moment,
it was 4. I think it was 4.
Yeah. So Chris didn't really care to go fishing. He just kind of went walking off while they were fishing. He walked down this road. You know,
it goes uphill. I've been on that road.
Yeah,
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
right. He takes this stroll, not all that far from where the other gentlemen were fishing on the river, and he sees initially, I believe it was 2 orbs in a field. And again, this is kind of really compressing time, but he decides to start walking away from it, and is, I guess, approached by a third orb, a much larger orb. I believe in some of it is described as he sees it from close up. It was more of an oblong shape with spikes, this odd thing. And he has this and didn't realize it at the time. He after this, he walks away, and he's got to walk through this muddy, road, this unpaved road through this mud and some of the, the shrubs and all. And when he makes his way back to the where the other guys were fishing, they're like, "Where were you? We've been looking for you." And he's like, "Well, I was only gone for a few minutes." And they go, "No, you've been missing all night." And he goes, "Well, where's my son?" And he goes, "He went looking for you." So Chris gets in a panic, goes looking for his son, eventually finds his son cowering under a bunch of bushes, hiding. And he's terrified because of what he's encountered. And they come back and they're arguing about this on the shore. And then they see this orb again. And that orb starts approaching them. They jump, they all get scared, jump in the vehicle. The orb chases them. Long story short, there was some missing time involved. There were some beings that Chris Jr. saw walking around. He was terrified of. Chris wasn't sure exactly what had happened. He reluctantly reported this to MUFON sometime not long after that. MUFON sent a regional director, James Carrion, to go investigate. This happened on January 8th, 2007. I should have started with that. But as a result of this, they decided to do a regression. MUFON ordered a regression that was conducted by Dr. Michael O'Connell. And they discovered that he had been, from his recollection, he had been on a craft and had observed these beings, and his son was there as well. This ended up making its way into a Discovery Channel documentary called UFOs Over Earth. And once that aired, it really kind of presented a negative view of the whole thing. The way it was, edited, it really made it seem as though the story was somewhat bogus. I don't think it was a very fair handling of it. And there's a lot of backstory to what all went on with the recording of the documentary and all. And I should have mentioned as well that Chris was a member of his local church. He was, a man of faith. And as a result of this, his church turned against him. They started viewing him as though he had somehow been involved with some negative being, some sort of demonic presence or something. And this really weighed heavily on him. His children were obviously ridiculed in school once the documentary aired. So it created quite a bit of turmoil in his life. Actually, it was as if all the trauma he had been through prior to this wasn't enough. Now he had the weight of this encounter. He had kind of distanced himself from speaking about this or anything because of all this negative publicity that it drew. And then this went on for a number of years until April 8th, 2012, which was, or it would have been the evening of the 7th, which was the 8th was Easter Day in 2012. That evening, he's in bed and hears, as he's asleep, he hears suddenly in his head this loud voice say, "Arise," which startled him. He sits up in bed and he didn't know what was going on. he sees these figures in the corner, and the next thing he knows, he's dressed, he's putting on his shoes, and he's already dressed, and he's following these beings out into the. And there are some other things that happened in between this, but I'm trying to condense this story as much as possible. It's a really drawn out thing. And Mike, please correct me if I'm stating anything inaccurate.
Oh, I'm going to add yours. You're doing great, but I'm making a little custom notes. I'm going to add some stuff. Yeah, keep going.
Okay. So he follows these beings out, and they're sort of hooded. They're shrouded in some form of a cape or something with a hood over their head, and they turn around and pull this thing off, and there are these beings that are somewhat translucent, kind of glowing with red eyes. And he had seen these before. There was an encounter at his home prior to this that I kind of left out for time. But when these beings, unveiled themselves, they handed him something. And it was this, and people get mired in the details of what this thing was. And it was this little fuzzy thing. And I don't think it really has a great deal of relevance to the story. For some reason, people tend to fixate on that piece. But this thing they hand him, he drops. And when he reaches down to pick it up, because they tell him, no, you must keep that. When he reaches down to pick it up, as he's looking back up, as he's getting up, he sees a bull charging him. So he puts his hands in front of his face and falls backwards as he believes he's going to get trampled by this bull. And when he's on his back, he sees this thing pass over him, and he sees stars through it. And so he jumps up, terrified. And when he jumps up, there's an apparition in front of him. And it's this thing that he refers to as the lady. It's this woman with, long blonde hair in a white gown. She's hovering, I believe, like 3 feet off the ground, and she's smiling at him. And she speaks to him and tells him, "You've suffered a lot. You know why I'm here." And she goes on to reveal things to him. This kind of spirals into this. He's unsure of what to do, whether, that she's wanting him to go forward with this information that she relayed to him. He doesn't know how to do it. Some other events occur that convince him that, okay, I'm going to talk about this. So he goes 2 weeks after this event. He contacts MUFON, and he's to go to a conference and speak about this. It was a conference in Asheville, North Carolina. And he goes to this conference, and as a result, he ends up meeting someone that's in attendance there. This person has her husband actually do all the communicating with Chris initially. And then later, sometime a couple of weeks after this, MUFON calls him back and asks if he would be willing to meet with her. That was Diana Pasulka. So that's kind of, and then the story goes on from there. But that's the groundwork, I guess, of this. And now Mike can add in the pieces that I kind of glossed over.
Oh, you did great. So the story is incredibly complicated and incredibly dense. And I had I've been to his home a few times. So here, let me say, I think I'm 1 year younger than Chris. So we're very close to the same age. And my sister lives in North Carolina, and in 2013, I think I've got this right. Yes, in 2013, I was visiting my sister, and because my mother was in a assisted living facility with Alzheimer's. And it was a really rough time for me. I was traveling back and forth to North Carolina a lot. And I just had, so I was staying at my sister's house for weeks on end at times. And so my mother died later that summer, and my father had died less than a year before. So, and he also died from what we thought was Alzheimer's. It was later diagnosed as dementia. So it was a rough few years for me and my brother and sister. So, but my parents had been living in Florida, and they moved, or we, my brother, sister, and I moved them to an assisted living care center in just a few miles down the road from where my sister lived, in a college town called Davidson, North Carolina, which is outside of Charlotte. So at that point, I was already known as the Owl Guy. And in 2009, I started a blog where I was talking about, initially I was just talking about synchronicities, but that very quickly turned into talking about UFOs, and it very quickly turned into talking about owls. So right from my online presence doing these interviews, on the blog, And then I started the podcast in the fall of 2009. So anyway, so I was immersed in this stuff. I was very new to this stuff, and I was very emotional. This was a really challenging time of my life, where at the same time that my parents were requiring all this care, as well as the hospice, as well as both of them passing, I was in the throes of trying to come to terms with what seemed to be UFO contact experiences in my life. Let me add this. I had a conversation with my sister. I remember talking to my sister, and I was like, I got to look into this. I got to follow this. And I can't. And there was a point, this would have been around 2009 or so, where I had the conversation with my sister and said, I got to follow this. I got to pull on this thread. And she said, and then I said, I simply can't do it with mom and dad. Like, it was something that my parents never would have been able to understand. And it had just come to such a head at that point. And my sister said, well, you don't really have to worry about that now, because they're not aware enough to even, they would never know. And, or, their memory issues were so debilitating so anyway, so that was where I was essentially in my emotional life. So I was visiting my mother, and I borrowed my sister's car. I think I had to rent a car. No, but I think, actually, let me think this through. I borrowed my sister's car, and here's what I did. I listened to an audio podcast on the airplane flying from Idaho, where I was living at the time, to North Carolina. And I listened to an interview that this guy Mel Fabregas did on a podcast that I used to listen to a lot, called Veritas. He doesn't cover the UFO subject much anymore. He's very political at this point, and I don't really follow him anymore. But he did a interview with Chris Bledsoe, and it was great. It was really great, and I was blown away. So when I got to North Carolina, I just called him up. I looked his number up in the phone book and called him up, and he just said, come on over. Come over. And I said, hey, it's a long drive. I'm coming with my sisters. I live here. I'm going to have to borrow a car. It's this long drive. And he said, spend the night. Don't worry about it. Spend the night. You can spend 2 nights if you want. So I'm like, okay. So I got in my car. I got in my sister's car and drove, I don't know what it is, like 4 hours or something, between Charlotte and where he was living in Fayetteville. And he's still in the Fayetteville area. He no longer lives in that house. So when I was at that house, that was the same. So I got there, and Chase Kloetzke arrived the same day I did. I arrived about a couple hours before Chase did. So, and Chase shows up in the book, and I'm not in the book, and that's just fine. So I know just what it means to take on a big, complicated project. And she played a different role in his life than I did. And so I had done an audio interview with Chase, and Chase was basically said that was the best interview she'd ever done with someone. And it was a very thorough discussion about her experience at an event in North Carolina. She was living in Georgia at the time. So Chase knew who I was. Chris had no idea who I was. So I just show up at the house, and this is 2013, which is 12 years ago. I think most of the kids were in high school. Chris Jr., I think, had graduated from high school. And so the house was full of kids and the kids' friends, and it was busy, and it was just this, and I'd lived in New York, and I'm from Michigan, so this felt like the South to me. Everyone was great. Everyone was super friendly. What can I get you? Let's eat. And the kids were awesome. And I just remember meeting the kids, and it was just like, they were so genuine and so open. And Chris took me around. And so when Chase got there, he took us to the Cape Fear River, to the spot. So he very step by step. Chris is if you've ever heard him interviewed, he's got this very slow, calm voice. And he very slowly explained, here's where we were. This is where the fire was. This is where they stood when they were fishing. And he said, I wasn't interested in fishing, and he was looking for a spot maybe to go deer hunting. So he said, he walked, here's where I walked. And so the river, obviously the river's downhill, and then to walk uphill, there's this muddy road, and we drove down that road in his truck. So he said, here's where I walked. And he got to the spot and said, here's where I stood, and I heard something in the woods. And he pointed to where it was. And he said, and I crouched down behind this bush. I thought it might be a deer. And then this little being I saw this being, and then I saw these orbs. And so I was right there with Chase. Chase had a friend of hers there. I apologize, I cannot remember her name, but she was working with Chase through MUFON. I believe it was MUFON at the time. I got to be careful, but I'm pretty sure it was MUFON at the time. Chase was involved with MUFON, and this woman was involved with MUFON. I think Chase is now no longer involved with MUFON. I can't speak to that directly. I haven't talked to her in a couple of years, but we used to talk all the time, or not all the time, but it was really common for us just to pick up the phone and talk. So, and then he said he crouched down, and then he said then the orbs were gone, these floating things were gone. He walked back down, and that's when the people were saying where they were missing. Now, he did a very good job of describing this in the book, an excellent job of describing it in the book. But what Chase and I and this other woman, this assistant to Chase, essentially this coworker or this MUFON member that was with Chase, wow, his voice was shaky. He teared up at times. And then he said, he didn't know where his son was. He didn't know where's Chris? He didn't make any sense. It was dark. Didn't know how it got to be dark. Didn't know how I think it was over 3 hours. If it wasn't over 3 hours, it was close to 3 hours. And he didn't know where his son was. And then he walked into the woods. There's a little clearing where you could park a truck and you could turn a truck around. You could have a campfire. And this is where they were fishing. So he walked me to the bush where Chris Jr. was crouching. This was brutal. This was really emotional to be a part of this and to have him walk me and Chris. I was a stranger to this guy. And I felt so welcomed. And I just felt he trusted me right from the start, and he trusted Chase. So, and then we got in the truck, and then we drove back up, and we drove the route that him and the people that were in the truck, and there was something chasing. This sounded like madness in the sense that the emotions were so high. They had to drive under what appeared to be a glowing object that was hovering above the road. This is the only road there. They basically gunned this truck under this object. If I'm getting details wrong, I apologize, but this is the best I can do right now. So, and then there's a road that they drove, and he pointed to the spots. Here's where, and he talked about people were freaking out. He basically said everyone thought it was the end of the world. Like there were orbs in the sky. There were people missing. Chris Jr. was talking about seeing a being. Chris Jr., who I've met and I think Chris did a beautiful job addressing these issues with his family in the book. He was very clear that Chris Jr. had a hard time integrating this experience. And I've seen Chris has been on Ryan's show. Chris has 4 kids: Chris Jr., Jeremy, Ryan, and Emily. I think I'm doing that in order as far as Chris Jr. being the oldest and Emily being the youngest. And Ryan now runs a podcast. I'm sort of stepping out of one story and doing this. This is to tell a story properly. I wish I could have done this in a different order, but Ryan runs a podcast called Bledsoe Said So, which is, and he's like, I don't think he's 30 yet. It's got, wow, does it have like youth energy to it? And, so they swear and they play loud music for the intro and outro, and they're funny and they interrupt each other and such. So, but it feels like one of those hanging out, teen influencer kind of things. But all the siblings have been on the show multiple times, all of them talking about their experiences. And so it's not just Chris, it's his wife, Yvonne, and all 4 kids. And the experiences are extensive. And it's incredible. The kids have a different way of talking about the experiences than Chris Sr. does, where they're much more jocular. I don't know what the even right word would be. They're just talking about it the same way they would talk about, playing basketball in the driveway or something. So anyway, Chris went point by point to all these experiences that he had along this road, and then he took us back to the house. And so, and then I met his parents, his mom and dad. And there was a tree on the yard, which that's an incredible story too. The tree, I got to I got to put my head in the tree. The tree is hollow, and And then Chase was doing kind of workaday stuff where she was taking samples from, there's a big circular burn mark in the yard where, like, it wasn't a flying saucer. It wasn't as big as a flying saucer would be, but it was bigger than a compact car would be from the hood to the tailgate kind of thing, or the hatchback. You know, it was the size of a Volkswagen Bug, let's say, this circle in the yard. I'm doing this from memory. It might be a little bit bigger than that, but smaller than a long bed pickup truck or something. So, and there was a circular burn mark in the yard, and then this tree caught on fire spontaneously. I can't remember where it fits into the story, but wow, that the story of the tree is as remarkable as any other event in this.
Because Chris, let me interject.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, please do.
Yeah. The Chris was struggling with whether to go public with his experience or not, and he was wanting, actually, I believe Diana Pasulka had asked for him to meet with the producers of The Conjuring. She was an advisor on the movie The Conjuring, and she was trying to set up a meeting with them to have Chris fly out to California to meet with them about some type of a movie, deal. And Chris was very reluctant. He did not really want to do it, but since the lady was asking him to speak out about this experience, he wanted a sign. He asked for a sign whether he should actually do it. And then that's where this tree starts burning from the inside in their front yard, and they can't turn it out. And you could probably do a better job of explaining that deal.
Yeah. It was in the backyard, and it was funny because Chris said, the tree, all of a sudden we're looking out, and I guess it was like one of the kids, I think it might have been Emily, said, "Dad, there's like sparks coming out of the tree in the backyard." And I think it was I got to be really careful. I think it was a hickory tree, and I might be wrong. But then he goes and so he takes a hose. It's raining. It had been raining all day. Excuse me. I don't think it was raining at the time. And so he takes a hose, and it's really funny. He's a great storyteller. And he said, so he walked Chase and I and Chase's friend right to the tree and said, like, I got the hose, and the tree's hollow that had been struck by light. I'm not sure what happened, but the tree was partially dead, and there was a fire on the inside of the tree. Some limbs were still alive and some were not, but there was a hollow. There was like a big open hole in the tree, and you could stick your head in the hole and see light out the top of the broken section above, but there were still big branches and limbs. So it was still like sort of a big tree. And he said, I remember this so clear. He said, "We walked out to the tree, been raining all day. So we walk there, splish, splish, splish. The lawn is soaked. It had been raining all day. How this thing caught fire, I don't understand. It's impossible." So he takes the hose, and he said, "I didn't know what to do. I put the hose right in the hole and then fed the hose up the hole and put the fire out," right? So this hose, big garden hose, the tree's maybe, I'm holding my hands out, 2.5 feet, maybe less than 3, but more than 2 feet wide. And he said, I ran the hose, and then I come back in, and then the tree lights on fire again. And he's got video somewhere on his YouTube, his Facebook page is filled with like little videos and pictures. And now he's gone over to Instagram, and it's just endless videos of orbs. But he put the fire out in this tree, and then it got lit again. And then that tree became a sort of a focal point. I went back there a couple years later, and visited him. And there were like little notes pushed into the tree that were like, help me in my time of need. Like very devout Christians were going to this tree as a sort of pilgrimage. And it was, people would just show up in his yard and just like go to the tree. His life flipped upside down with all of this. So it wasn't just, and so he's a very gracious, open, kind man, but wow. He feels that he's been at the center of a whirlwind of activity, both from people wanting to hear his story, wanting to tell his story, wanting to make movies, wanting to have him at conferences. He says yes to some things, he says no to other things, and then he's been at the receiving end of so much paranormal experiences. And let me say this: he frames his experiences through his devout Christian faith. So he says that the orbs in his yards are angels. And he says this in a way, he says, now I'm jumping forward, he's been, for the last few years, he just goes in his yard, he's got a nice camera, he just takes video of these orbs night after night after night after night. It is, go to his Instagram account, it is mind-blowing, the number of orbs. Some people who've never been there say like, he's just misidentifying satellites. And I have seen orbs in his yard. I've seen stuff in his yard. I've had weird stuff happen in association with, and I'm not the only one. Like Grant Cameron, who's an excellent researcher, Canadian researcher, has had very powerful stuff happen in and around Chris. So I can tell some of that stuff too. So I got a little off here. Let me just go to the notes. So the issue with so I think it was either the History Channel or National Geographic or the Discovery Channel. Wow, I got to be careful. I don't know what it was. Do you remember what the
Yeah, it was Discovery, the UFOs Over Earth documentary.
Okay, and then that is online now under or segments of that. I think you have to watch it in segments, or was online. It was called the Fayetteville Encounter or the Fayetteville Incident. Correct. And I watched it. It's not as brutal as, it's a hit piece, but some of the people were allowed to tell the story. So the parts of the story I feel got told well. There were multiple witnesses. They interviewed some of the other people that were involved. Chris Jr. is in that documentary. Wow, you could tell he does not want to be on camera. That was like mean-spirited on the part of the production team to put him on camera when it was so obviously clear that he did not want to be a part of that production. So the story that was told beautifully in the documentary, in his book about the documentary, James Carrion was the lead investigator at this event. But at the same time, they were investigating the event at the same time when they were making a documentary, which is really messed up. Because you're trying to interview someone at the same time you got the video camera on them. So you read the book, I read the book, and I've heard it from him telling it to me. I'll do a shortened version of it here. He was supposed to, and I can't remember the time. I'm going to say 10 o'clock. The film crew was supposed to show up at his house at 10 o'clock. He's got stuff out for them. He's got food for them ready. He's waiting for them, and they don't show up. And so finally they call and they say, "Hey, can you come to the hotel instead?" And he said, "Well, I thought we were going to meet here." He said, "Well, just come on over to the hotel." So he gets in the car and goes to the hotel, and then he finds out what room they're in, and then he goes to the room and he knocks on the door, and they open the door, and there's a guy with a lie detector set up, like a licensed guy from, I think, former FBI agent. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a professional lie detector operator waiting in the room, and they say, "Will you take a lie detector right now?" They totally like caught him off guard on purpose. Like this would have been appropriate if they thought he was a Russian spy, and it was like and this was the CIA, but it wasn't. This was like a guy from a volunteer organization that, like, I was so angry when I heard this story. Oh my God, I was so angry when I heard this story directly from him. And Chris was just felt victimized. It was awful. And that was James Carrion. And that guy was the guy who brought in Bigalow at a certain chapter of right around. So this was 2007 when the event happened. I don't know when the production happened. I don't think it might have been a year later or over a year later, but it was still, but when I met him in 2013, wow, these wounds were raw. He was angry still, and understandably, and I would say he was hurt. I don't want to put. So that was my impression, that he was still this stung bad. And so MUFON is an organization where I know a lot of people on the ground, like the grassroots, the people who are doing I hate this term, but the boots on the ground investigation. They are genuinely interested in this phenomenon. I'll also say that like I know a lot of people who work for MUFON, or are members of MUFON, let me put it that way, who have had the direct experience. They are abductees or experiencers or whatever word you want to use. So there are people on the ground level doing it for very personal reasons. And then there are people at the administrative level that are, I'm not allowed to swear on this show, so I can't say what they are. So, and I would include James Carrion in that. And then James Carrion has been absolutely silent about this since his very ugly breakup with MUFON after a bunch of stuff happened. There was a lot of state directors that quit. So I'm getting way off the topic now. So anyway, Chris and then he took the lie detector test, and the only question that he didn't, that showed deceptive, that he was being deceptive or they couldn't confirm that he was saying the truth. They asked him, did you meet beings from outer space? Something like that. I'm doing this from memory now. Did you meet beings from outer space? And they asked him about it afterwards, and he said, I don't know what these beings were. I have no idea. I don't know where they came from.
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
Oh, everything was loaded about this. Everything was loaded. The production was loaded. Their intentions were loaded right from the start. Yeah. I don't want to. So let's change the subject.
Lie detectors don't mean anything anyway. They measure things like how nervous someone is.
Unless you were doing a hit piece,
right,
documentary. Yeah.
I think it's really important to point out that in the years following this, and that Chris has done many very long form informal interviews, and I've watched probably 95% of them, as well as his son Ryan, who is very vocal about a lot of aspects, even about aspects that Chris won't speak about. And I'm the type, I'm a pretty analytical guy, and I look for inconsistencies, and I can tell you, I don't see inconsistencies in his story. And he's a very genuine person. He comes across as a very genuine person. The trauma is obvious to anyone that sees it, particularly in Chris Jr.
Chris Jr. is doing much better these days. So, and I'm just saying that from what Ryan has said and stuff, and how he sounds on the podcast with Ryan and such.
So this is a very complex story, and we haven't even hit the truly bizarre parts of it. As crazy as just this part has been, that's only the very tip of the iceberg. And I would say that at this, from this point, you would say that this is purely anecdotal evidence, right?
Whoa. But this anecdotal, except that there's multiple witnesses.
Exactly. But then you have to start factoring in all the surrounding subsequent information that came out of it. You have multiple individuals, like you mentioned, Grant Cameron, John Alexander, Bob McGuire. Many people have gone there and come back with incredible stories of their own experiences. Grant Cameron, very quickly, Grant Cameron goes to visit and stays a few days with him. When he gets there, Chris's dog was out walking around with them, and all of a sudden the dog's bleeding, and the dog appeared to have cut itself on something, and it's bleeding profusely. Like Chris was panicking that he thought the dog was going to die. And Grant is there and actually took pictures when this happened. Chris, because of his experiences, appears to have developed some form of abilities, and one of these is healing. Chris puts his hands over the cut and is praying over this, and the dog all of a sudden stops bleeding and is fine. And Grant Cameron says, look, I saw this with my own eyes. I was there, and I documented it. John Alexander talks about going there and going out, and, Chris tells him they're here, and this orb appears to him. Like he knew in advance the orb was going to show up. Bob McGuire goes there and has his own experiences, and then ends up getting the hitchhiker effect as a result of going there. So it's not just what Chris is saying, but then beyond that, you have this gravity well that he created that all of a sudden, this NASA astronomer engineer named Hal Povemeyer shows up at their door one day, and he has an interest in hearing the story and becomes very good friends with them. Then a NASA mission controller with deep ties in the NSA and other organizations, who is referred to in Diana Pasulka's book as Tyler, is actually I think it's pretty well known by now, that is a gentleman named Tim Taylor. He shows up and befriends Chris, and he does some testing with what he claims is like recovered materials, handing them to Chris, and it puts Chris in a trance state. You have Jim Simivan, CIA senior intelligence officer, befriend him and has publicly defended his statements. This is discussed quite a bit in the book, how he even, spoke on Chris's behalf, saying, look, don't be ridiculing this guy. We know that his experiences are real. There are many people. In fact, as Mike mentioned, Chris was actually the first investigation conducted by ATIP. When Bigalow and Bass got involved, that was supposedly their first on-site investigation. There have been many other things related to this that add to the story, that go well beyond just his claims. For my part, I do not know Chris personally. I've studied his case because it resonates with things in my own experience, things that are not mainstream ufology, things that in fact tend to offend people because they don't, it's just doesn't fit within the framework of our understanding or the official narrative of our understanding of the phenomenon. But those things struck a chord with me. And as a result, I dove very deeply into this story. And following it for several years, I've had a little bit of discussion online with Ryan and made some inquiries to him about other details. And I'm personally convinced that Chris is telling the story as he knows it. I do not sense any deception in any of his statements whatsoever. But having said that, I have to remain as objective as possible and recognize the individuals who have gravitated towards him. So if I have any concerns, it's more from that aspect, not Chris himself. And then beyond that, and then this goes much further down the rabbit hole, but as I mentioned earlier, my roots are in the historical aspect of the phenomenon, and I have concerns that, or should I say, I have concerns because I am very aware of the deceptive nature of the phenomenon, going back very, very long time.
Right.
And I have, on Brothers as a Serpent, we have discussed many, many cases of individuals who had very similar circumstance and were told similar things that were there, and we haven't even touched on this. There was, and this is probably a good segue into that, is very early on, one of the things that started this interest, this governmental interest in Chris's story, was a bit of information that Chris received from the lady. And it was in regard to an assassination attempt on the Pope. And I know we've all heard those kind of stories before from other people, but in this case, he relayed the information to the right people, and as a result, an attempt was foiled. There was somebody arrested, and this got him on the radar. And that type of thing has happened. Those type of predictions. In fact, when Chris made his first appearance in Asheville at that MUFON conference in 2012, the way he got everybody's attention was because everybody, the idea of bringing up the lady in a UFO conference, it definitely didn't, it's strange now, but it was completely off the wall in 2012. And he was trying to get them to understand the significance, and it kind of was, they didn't see it, right? And so he said, look, this is important. There's going to be I believe he said it was going to be like a 6.8 earthquake on a certain date in Baja California, which actually happened. Like, he made this prediction because I guess he had been told this by the lady. Those kind of things are not, this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is kind of par for the course for the phenomenon. There have been other instances. Like, take for example, and I'm showing my age. Mike, you and I are pretty close to the same age. So, you will remember back in 1989, the Gulf Breeze 6.
Sure.
They had and for those that may not know what I'm talking about, in 1989 there were 6 military intelligence officers stationed in Augsburg, West Germany, I believe it was. And they began having communications with some non-human intelligence, which eventually became contact with what they called the Virgin Mary. And during their conversations, they received a prediction of an earthquake that was going to happen in Tehran, Iran. It was a very strong, like a 7.4 or something earthquake, and that, a bunch of people were going to be killed, and it happened. And this convinced them that they were really communicating with some form of intelligence. And as a result, they went AWOL because they were given all of this, apocalyptic story of what was going to happen. And it's a really long drawn out case, and they ended up getting apprehended back in the United States. They made their way back to the U.S. and went to Gulf Breeze. That's why, hence the Gulf Breeze 6. And this was back around the time when there were a number of sightings in that area. And they were apprehended, and, they were going to be court-martialed over this. And for some reason, there was some form of intervention, and they were let go. And we could do a whole episode on just that thing. We've covered it a good bit on Brothers of Serpent, but it's a very strange case. But going back, the only reason I bring it up is the similarity of this prediction given by this female deity, telling them that there's going to be something that occurs. It happens. They are convinced that this is true. So I can completely, in other words, if I placed myself in that situation, there is no doubt that I would not, it would be very, very difficult to maintain your objectivity. Right. You're seeing these incredible things and being told these things that end up happening. It's like everything is being, proving to be true. So it's very easy to get pulled in certain directions. Now, that's not to say that, in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't dispute that Chris has had these experiences. I just don't know the nature of the experience. I don't think that it's necessary for people to take a side, like it's either true or not true, and like they have to go all in on one side or the other. I think that I have a term for this. People in ufology, particularly the talking heads, and this is going to touch on something Mike brought up related to MUFON and how certain elements within MUFON are maybe not as forthright as others in terms of what their objectives are there. A good example of that is, I don't know if you've read the book Wayward Sons, which is about NICAP and how it was infiltrated by, government intelligence organizations. And I'm quite certain that that is true with virtually every ufological related thing, like including social media.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So there's this tendency, and you see this particularly on social media, where whenever there's somebody that relays their experience, the talking heads immediately pop up and start condemning it, or there's no objectivity there. I use this term. I trademark my term here is ufological nihilism, where everything is bull. Like, oh no, it's there's government connections to this. It's definitely a psyop here. And the thing is, when you do that, you shut your mind to data. You're not listening anymore. You're not even giving it the chance to play out to see whether the story resonates with other historical data. In other words, sometimes there may be an aspect, and this happens pretty often in my research, is that there will be some aspect that is so obscure, you're like, there's no way they could know that. Like, what are the odds that they read that passage in that book from 1,200 years ago or something like that? In other words, there's these little tips in this that just kind of give you that gut feeling like there's an element to truth there. Like, this guy's not making this up. This is something. I'll give you an example. And I'm getting long-winded on this. I need to let you guys interject here. But one of the details, this small detail that Chris talks about of these beings that they've encountered, these small, glowing, semi-transparent, I guess, beings.
Like they were dipped in liquid glass.
Yeah. And he says that they had a triangle on their chest, which, and Chris points out, he said that is a very important detail. It means something, but he doesn't really elaborate very much. Like he's somewhat reluctant. He recognizes that some of these things are going to be just completely unbelievable to most people. So he's reluctant to go into too much detail unless they kind of, he's kind of prodded, and he's not being evasive. He's just recognizes that there is a line of where people are going to accept what he's saying. So he emphasizes the importance of this triangle, and then he will point out how this triangle is used by NASA in a number of different things. And he says, these are not coincidences. And this court kind of like resonates with me through my research, and this is really obscure, but there's a book by Michael Celis, who was a Byzantine Greek monk around, I believe he was born around the year 1000, shortly after that. He wrote a book where he's talking about his discussions with another monk, a Mesopotamian monk named Marcus. And I actually have a quote of what he wrote in this. And he said, this guy was an inspector of demonic phantasms. And he said, this is a quote from what this book that was written over 1,000 years ago says. Beings of the divine and celestial order were represented by the equilateral triangle as being consistent with itself and with difficulty incalculable to evil, whilst human beings are represented by the isosceles triangle as being in some measure liable to error in their choice, yet capable of reformation and repentance. On the other hand, the demonic tribe were represented by the scaling triangle as being at variance with itself and not at all approaching excellence. So here's a guy 1,000 years ago talking about these phantasms having triangles.
Yeah.
That's a really obscure reference. It's like, if he's going to make something up, why? How did he know that? And maybe it's a complete coincidence, but it is interesting in the least. Again, it's just a hint that maybe there's something there.
So,
there's something there, yeah.
So the few comments I have at this point, one, I wish they never hypnotized him, because that always is going to just throw noise into the mix. But he only got hypnotized once, right?
No, he was hypnotized twice.
Wait.
He did a second regression by Barbara Lamb in 2018.
Oh, I love Barbara.
Okay, so
and you're right there. You hit one of the soft points for me. Like, again, I completely believe what Chris is saying, but being as objective as possible and recognizing that certain elements within MUFON, and keep in mind, I was a member of MUFON in the 90s. So, I'm not trying to, say that they're all bad or whatever, but certain elements within there, particularly the individual, I think Mike and I are on the same page with James Carrion. There are elements there that I don't trust.
Yeah. And
the fact that they set up the regression concerns me, because you have to, being objective again, was there anything implanted, right, that might surface later? I don't believe that's necessarily the case, but again, we're trying to remain as objective as possible. You have to recognize that there is that possibility.
Right, and it's also not a reliable memory tool, so anything he recovered under that isn't really necessarily as important as the stuff he actually remembered. But the other thing is, you said he had Crohn's disease, which...
Oh, that was... here, let me just interrupt. He was cured of Crohn's... So he said, oh my God, this is... I'll go back to the night. In fact, I can't remember this. What was the night that he had the event on Cape Fear River?
January 8th, 2007.
Okay, so he's running around the house, and he's oh God, let me just, so I'll try to be a little more formal in this. He has the experience on the Cape Fear River. His son is missing. He has a number of hours of missing time. They drive back, all the people. They think the world is ending. They're driving under. I was in his truck, and he said it was right here, right above us, directly above us. We drove under. There was some creature, some gargoyle creature that was chasing the truck that was behind them. There was stuff going on the road. He talked about they were hysterical. The people in the car were panicking, and they were who got dropped off first, and one insisted he get dropped off first, so he had to drive. So he dropped all these people off in his truck. It felt like the world was ending. And then he gets back to his own house, and he turns on the news, and there's nothing. I think it was just him and Chris Jr. were alone at the house, if I remember. And there's nothing on the news. He's like, the world is ending. And then I can't remember if the dogs were barking in the backyard, but he went out into the yard thinking there was a burglar or someone was in the yard.
Yeah, the light was on in his shed.
Yes, and so I was there when the dogs were there, and there was wow, those things, there's hound dogs. It sounds just like the scene out of any movie where they're the guys escaped prison and they get the dogs. So these hounds are they were loud, and so I've heard them barking and stuff like that right there. And I saw the pens, and he said, so I went out in the yard, and he took me right to the spot. And here's where the glowing person that was that looked like it was dipped in liquid glass. This little short entity glowing. And then I was right there he said, I turned in this direction. I was near this tree. I turned around and it was right close to me. And I basically said, you got me. So I think that's the quote. He said, you got me, or something very similar to that, essentially realizing that there was no way he could run. There's nothing he could do to defend himself. And then, so all of this is going on. And then he realizes, oh my goodness, I haven't taken my Crohn's medication. Like the event started in the afternoon. Now it's the middle of the night. Everyone's panicking. Him and his son are alone at the house, and he's like, I haven't taken my Crohn's medication. He never has taken the. Now I'm like, I want to be careful saying this. My understanding, he stopped that night, has never taken it again. He was cured. So this is that cure that shows up in the, or like the healing abilities of these UFOs that have been. Yeah. That's kind of a well understood by the people who are doing the research. It shows up often in these cases. Oh, here, let me do one more.
Before you do that, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come right back and you can continue. So I'm going to start this mid-show break with some unfortunate news. We recorded this on the 6th of February, and I'm only getting around to airing it now because I actually have a few shows ahead, which is unusual. And in the meantime, at the end of February, Marty suffered a very serious heart attack. He is okay. He is recovering, but he is out of action for a while. And that was kind of shocking to me because he seemed to be in very good health. And so you can, if you go to the Brothers of the Serpent Discord, there's a whole messages for Marty section. You can leave messages for him and such, and he will get to them, assumingly when he feels well enough. So in the meantime, we do have this very unique conversation with him and Mike, which I'm very grateful we got to do. All right, contact info, as usual, is wheredidtheroadgo.com. That's where you can find links to our Discord and Facebook pages and all that stuff. And if you go into the blog section, you can find a link to my Substack. You can become a patron. It's only $3 a month. Get extra stuff with almost every show and bonus stuff as well as shows a week or two early, commercial free. It's just a win-win all around, and it helps us out immensely. And I have never raised it from the $3 that it started at almost 10 years ago at this point. So, if you can't do that and you want to help out, share the show. Give us some good ratings wherever you listen to it. And that is always very much appreciated. For a recommendation, I'm going to go with a podcast that I believe it was Jonathan from Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic podcast that recommended this to me. If I'm wrong, please let me know, but I'm pretty sure he was the one that suggested it. Modes of Thought in Anterran Literature. It's put out by Wolf at the Door, which I don't know much about. There's 40 episodes so far. I have gotten, I'm partway through. It's very interesting. I'm not sure exactly where it's going, but it has me fairly well hooked. It's about a professor who's teaching a class on this ancient civilization that's like 75,000 years old that has been discovered, but it's being kept secret. And so people don't know if he's just making all this stuff up or if there's something to it, and then weird stuff starts happening. It's a slow burn, though. So you're mostly listening to him doing lectures, and some of it's on actual real ancient history, so it's kind of cool in that respect, too, although he cannot pronounce certain things correctly, like Denisovans or Göbekli Tepe, and that just boggled me when they got to that point, and he was saying them in a way I've never heard anyone say them before, but hey, whatever. It's definitely worth a listen. It's very well done, and it's definitely going in an interesting direction. So that's it. It's, again, the title is Modes of Thought in Anterran Literature, and that's Anterran. And that's my recommendation for you this week. Also, Jonathan's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Gold Mine, which I've not finished yet, but I'm very much enjoying, is, I believe, available now, and he has his audio book coming out April 15th, and you can pre-order it on Audible. So there you go. All right, back to the show. All right, so I'm here with Mike Clelland and Marty Garza, and Mike, continue with what you were saying.
Let me just look this up because I actually found this. I think I got the date of this.
And I wanted to point out with the Crohn's that getting an illness prior to having an extreme event like this is not unusual. also putting him in a liminal state of his life, which also adds to the likelihood of a weird experience.
He talks about it in the book. His health was so bad and so debilitating that his job as a contractor was suffering terribly. I think I've got that right. So I met him on Friday, May 31st in North Carolina, and that would have been 2013. And I wrote a little essay. I wrote a little short blog post June 3rd. So this must have been just shortly after that. Yeah. And
it was just after a year after the second encounter with the lady, or the first encounter with the lady.
Yeah. And then I wrote this blog post less than a week later, just a few days later. So the woman's name, I remember, so I found it here. Her name was Renetta. And she was I think she was nice. And I think she was a little overwhelmed. I don't think she'd ever been to anything like this, like to someone's home like this. And so we're in the backyard in the sun. It's May, it's springtime, it's the South, it's pleasant out. We're in the backyard and the kids are there. Ryan's around and the kids are around and it's me and Chase and Renetta and Chris and Chris's wife Yvonne is around and people are kind of going in and out of the house. I think this is just normal for that household. The people so we're in the backyard and we're kind of sitting out, and he's got a big backyard, and that's where the tree is. Now, this is not, there's no farms or anything around there, but it's just kind of on the edge of that suburb. The lots are kind of big, but the homes are very modest, and so it's not like but it's not like farmland. So when he said the bull was in the yard, there's no bulls in the neighborhood. It's not like there's a farm or a cattle ranch nearby. So let me back up to that night, which would have been, I think this would have been Friday night. I think this would have been the night of the event, or the night that I met him. So I met him on Friday in the afternoon, and then we spent all day together, and then the sun is down. We're in the backyard, and he says, we would just sit here. We kids would be around. We'd hang out here all summer long. We'd just look up in the sky, and we'd always felt like we were always seeing something in the sky. And he said, we would see things, like that light over there. We'd see stuff like that. And he just kind of pointed casually to this little dot, and then he just got right back into the conversation. I looked up and I was like, what is that? What is that? And the way the yard was, there was a better place to get a wider view of the sky. So I walked with Renetta over to the center of the yard where we were standing initially. It was just up against some trees, so we didn't have a full view of the sky. So we walked over. Now, this was it wasn't quite fully summer, but it had that kind of humidity in the air feel, looking at the sky. Now, I had been living out west, so I didn't see that very often, but I grew up in the Midwest, so I kind of knew. So there was a tiny dot. It didn't look like anything interesting. It was blinking, as I recall, but it felt like an orange light in the sky. I got to be careful. I don't remember what was actually orange, but that's it was so a light in the sky. And it looked like it was very far away. If I glanced at it, I would have dismissed it just as a jet way, way off at a high elevation. But standing there, it was moving around. And you know what we did? We walked to a different part of the yard because I was worried. You know how if you're looking at the stars and the trees are swaying gently, it can create the illusion that the trees are still and the stars are moving. Do you know what I'm saying? So what we did is we moved further into the yard, so we had a very clear view of this thing. This was moving around in this weird liquidy fluid motion. And the only way I can describe it is the way one of those little water bugs can skate across the surface of the pond. They're not moving like any other. It's a weird fluid motion. So this thing was moving in this kind of zigzaggy way, in this liquidy fluid motion, and then we just lost sight of it behind the trees. It was certainly not a conventional aircraft. And I remember the woman, Renetta, was quite frightened. She was very Southern. She said, "Oh, it was giving me chills," which I thought was which was giving me chills too. I was like, "What is that?" So, and then fast forward to some years later, this would have been around, I would have to figure out the date. My sister's daughter was getting married. So I went with my partner at the time, Andrea. We went to North Carolina, and Andrea and I had met and spent time with, or I had already knew Chris, but Andrea met him at a UFO conference in Maine, and we got to hang out. And he's very gregarious in that kind of environment, and so we got along splendidly. So when we were down in North Carolina visiting my sister, we made an effort to go visit Chris. So Andrea and I spent the night at Chris's house. And on that night, this maybe was 2016, maybe. I could look it up. It was the weekend that my sister's daughter got married. So, but in the backyard, Ryan's there. Ryan's super easy to get along with, and we're like walking around the yard, and Ryan's funny, and that was just easy. And and then he I'm like, what is that? What is that? And there was something, and it was like, it looked like, now, if someone wanted to fake this, it looked like a ping pong ball with an orange light on the inside of it, setting on the roof of his house. But we couldn't get a good view of it. We'd like walk in one way, and I'm like, is this, it's behind the tree. There's a tree. The way the tree was, the only way to really get a better look at it is we'd need to get a ladder and climb up on the top of the house. And I'm like, there's an orange thing like on the roof. Is it hovering or is it setting on the roof? And we walked around in one direction and we couldn't see it from another direction. So the tree was hiding it, and we got a nice view of it from only one spot. And I was like, are we seeing something on the other side of the house? And it just looks like it's on the roof. And so we walked around and looked at this thing for 5 minutes. And then we just kind of got bored and walked away, and then it was gone. And then we didn't see it again. I'll say that could have been faked. There was no reason why they had to prove anything to me at that night. Chris never saw it. Andrea never saw it. It was just me and Ryan looking at this little orange orb glowing with a weird electric orange on the what seemed to be setting on the roof. So I don't know what to make of that.
He has the ability to manifest these things. He can predict when they're coming, and there are many, many people that have experienced it. Other podcasters have gone to his place and experienced it. I know we have. I don't know Chris, but oddly enough, we have a number of mutual acquaintances, and these acquaintances some have tried to set up a meeting with, Russ and Kyle, Brother of the Serpent, and I to meet with Chris. We were actually supposed to last June, and then something happened, and Chris ended up having to cancel the meet, or he was going to be at a conference, but for some reason we keep crossing paths, but he's had this professed ability to do this, to predict when the orbs, and even, like I said, John Alexander talks about it. Well, last year, and of course, I don't get my data from television, but on the History Channel, they have that show, Beyond Skinwalker. Mm-hmm. Well, they had an episode where they actually went out to his place, and they put, an electroencephalogram on him, to monitor his brain activity. Mm-hmm. And they had him sit out in his yard in a lawn chair, staring at the sky, and they're monitoring his brain activity. And he starts pointing out where the orbs are going to appear. And they could see this. They could see the effects on his brain. Like the brain activity suggested that he knew these things were going to appear. They were just blown away. It was, again, trying to maintain objectivity, giving the people that involved in the show, you don't know, but it certainly appears as though they're, corroborating some of what he's claiming. It's, statistically, it's not, analytically, it's not purely anecdotal stuff. Now they're actually recording.
Right. That's interesting. I didn't realize they did that. That's cool.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. Yeah, he told me about that before it happened. He was, it's interesting because he's at the center of this, in the sense that he's the guy with the thing on his head, the funny little hat with the little wires coming out of it. And he would have every right to be, ego driven, but he's not. He's basically saying this is important for the world. Not saying this isn't. He's like, there's a difference, but saying this is like, I'm important. He doesn't say that. He said this is important for the world.
Right. That
this information is coming out. So he's very, which I think that there's that the people who have the direct experience, there's like this need to be taken seriously. Chris recognizes that he's being taken seriously because he's got these, things like exactly that. And people like Jim Semivan, who is vouching for him publicly. And then there's a long list of people like that. So, but yeah, that was remarkable. As is so much else.
He is a very humble person. And some of the information that he was given he has gradually, released. And part of that is that there is some form of an apocalypse coming. And when I say apocalypse, I mean it in the true sense of a revelation. not necessarily any sort of cataclysm or anything like that. But that's been the information that he's been talking about recently. And, and of course it parallels with some of the stuff that's out there in terms of, something's coming, and that there's, this disclosure thing is there's some form of deadline because of some impending event of some sort. And that's been spun in every which direction imaginable, for alien invasions to, coronal mass ejections that are going to cause, earth changes. And there's just every iteration of what this could be. But Chris's take is more on the positive side. He's saying, look, we're going to hit a rough patch ahead. There's going to be some turmoil, but we will make it through it. It's short-lived. And on the other side of this is going to be an awakening. It's going to be a positive thing, not a negative thing. And part of the information he was given, which he didn't even understand himself. He was told, and I'm going to butcher it if I try to quote him, but it was something along the lines that when the red star Regulus appears between the paws of the Sphinx, will be the dawn of the new awakening. And he didn't even know what that meant. Now, I should preface that by saying that when he was in his recollection or his regression of his experience while he was abducted in that first Fayetteville, the Cape Fear experience, he saw himself flying through space. Like he said, he felt as though he was inside of some form, almost like a crystal sphere, like a glass sphere. Mm-hmm. And he could see space, and he could see, the continental United States. And then suddenly he finds himself in Egypt before the Sphinx and the pyramids. And he's told this, and he didn't know what to make of it. And through his connections with NASA, and these are legitimate, like he's got the receipts. He shows, the pictures of him at NASA in facilities that the public is not allowed in. And so, that lends credibility to things that he says. He comes to find out that when this alignment is going to happen, and I believe it's happening in late 2026 or early 2027. And this lines up with some of the Edgar Cayce predictions I don't want to butcher this, but supposedly there was some red stone or something that was going to mark when the secret chamber or whatever under the left paw of the Sphinx was going to be discovered or something along those lines. So, and this turns out that this is actually an alignment that is going to happen. So again, is that significant? That's an arguable point, but it is interesting. It's more data for this very, very complex picture. And, there are a lot of things that he says he's predicted. He had previously mentioned that this rough patch that we were going to hit had something to do with a war with Iran. Now, I understand that, it's sort of like predicting an earthquake. Like if you get enough people predicting these things, eventually one of them is going to be right? You got, it's just statistically every day somebody's saying, well, yeah, there's going to be an earthquake in Southern California. It's like, oh, yeah, those things happen all the time, right? But he made this prediction like in 2012 or something. And at that time, we weren't necessarily in the situation that we find ourselves today, where that kind of a confrontation doesn't seem so far-fetched now.
No, a war with Iran hasn't seemed far-fetched since the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. And that, and that goes back to some of the things that were predicted to the Gulf Breeze 6. You also have, and there's a lot of similarities also with, I don't know if you're familiar with Dorthy Martin back in the mid or early 1950s. She was a contactee that was communicating with the Guardians, which, interestingly enough, those little characters that Chris is communicating with or has encountered call themselves Guardians of Creation. So there's some overlap there. And Dorthy Martin was given apocalyptic prophecies as well. And now she actually there was a group created around her called the Seekers. And these were, we tend to think that people, they're in you've got like these cults, these UFO cults and stuff, and we have a tendency to think that they're gullible people, but in this case, like the Seekers that were following Dorthy Martin, these were business owners, and these were rather sophisticated people. They weren't easily fooled, right? But yet, because of this alleged event that was going to happen, and they were going to be saved by these flying saucers that were going to come down and everything. And this was highly publicized. In fact, it ended up being studied, and there was a book written about it. In the book, spoiler alert, the book's called When Prophecy Fails.
Right.
And I guess this is an example of where the communications, and there's a lot of strangeness revolving around that whole story. The Dorthy Martin story is an interesting story. There have been books written about it because it's more complex than this little quick version I'm giving you, but
right.
It serves as an example of how this is not the first time this has happened. This is kind of par for the course for the phenomenon. So again, you've got these parallels, and that's where I say don't, for these, ufological nihilists, don't write these things off strictly because there are certain aspects of it that you are you find suspect. You need to be open to all the data and follow it. Doesn't mean you need to put your chips down on one side or the other. Just watch and observe and see whether the things that he's saying resonate with other facts that might convince you one way or the other, or might tip the scales one way or the other.
Yeah. You had mentioned something else. There was another point I wanted to ask you about. Going back, because there was the disease he had and the liminality of all that, the hypnosis, and there was one other thing that stood out to me, but now it's been like half an hour and I don't remember what it was.
There are so many.
Well, the Virgin Mary type of apparition is also interesting, and the way that works in, and I wonder what he would have seen had he not been Christian.
I don't think he never called it the Virgin Mary, and he did the image of it. It doesn't. There's a painting that was done by Doug Alt, who's I don't know if he's had direct experiences, and I've met him, but he did a wonderful painting of the Shining Lady, as he sometimes refers to her, and in the background is a tree, the trees in the background, but the woman was blonde, very radiant, beautiful, glowing, projected this energy of universal love. So it was a very religious type experience. But the lady in white is an archetype that's been around all throughout.
Oh yeah.
Yes. So there's nothing new about that archetype. Where the Virgin Mary is often in blue and is often, is young and has dark hair. In depictions, I guess I'm thinking of.
So the woman in white is also very commonly found in Bigfoot encounters.
Yeah. We're dealing with a genuine, complex mystery, and it does no one. It serves no one to try to simplify it.
True.
He points out, and again, he's some of this information he's reluctant to discuss, but one of the things that has been disclosed was that she claimed to go by many names, but the name that she gave him was Hathor.
Oh, I don't remember reading that or hearing that. Wow, that's interesting.
Yes, and then I'm going to add, again, because my roots are always in the past, and this is remarkably not more well known. And in fact, I was having a discussion with my wife about this because she's very interested in Chris's story as well. And I told her, his experiences are not particularly unusual for the phenomenon. I would say that one of the more unusual aspects is that generally, this is not the rule, but, or should I say, but generally these type of things seem to happen to marginal characters. Like they're usually people who have some sort of background that always makes you doubt whether they're being truthful or not.
Yep.
And one example of that would be Edward Kelly, working with John Dee.
Yeah.
The Enochian communications that they had their own encounter with the lady, but in that case, it was Babylon.
Right.
Another very obscure, and I guess I can see why this isn't known because it's a marginal character or marginalized character, but it is it's one of these little tidbits that I find interesting. is in 1938, L. Ron Hubbard wrote a manuscript called Excalibur.
Oh, yeah.
And he talks about his experiences. He was suffering from, I don't remember what it was, but he was hospitalized and he had an encounter with his guardian angel, which he described as this smiling woman in white. He referred to her as the Empress, and he stated that she would provide him with information and that she served as a guide and protector throughout his life. When in more recent, in the 70s or so, when all the lawsuits related to the, in fact, let me add to this. Hubbard claimed that Dianetics was written by automatic writing dictated by the Empress.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when the lawsuits came about related to some of the people that were disclosing some of the, supposedly the information that they felt was intellectual property of the Church of Scientology, there were a number of lawsuits, and obviously whenever there's lawsuits, there's, all sorts of discovery and things. And one of them was a document that was actually, written into evidence. It was called Blood Ritual. And in that, it was handwritten. This was a handwritten document written by Hubbard, where he talks about this Egyptian deity that he referred to as the goddess of love, but was also known as the destroyer of man. And Hubbard's son revealed in an interview that the beautiful smiling woman in the gown that Hubbard referred to as the Empress was Hathor.
Huh. Well, that's
awesome.
interesting.
When you consider, if you know your history related to the remote viewing program, you'll know that Hubbard referred to remote viewing as a technology that was discovered, not created. That information came from this Empress. That's a very odd coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah.
We are just about out of time, though. We can continue this in a Patreon. But Mike, how can people find you?
You can Google UFOs Owls. I'm the first thing that comes up. I'm about the next 25 things below that. You can find me on MikeClelland.com. That's Mike Clelland, all one word, CLELLAND is how my last name is spelled. And from there, there's that website got links to everything, books and podcasts and such.
And all your podcasts, including the ones you talked about tonight, are up on the podcast feed, right? There's
a very few. Oh, here, let me say there's one podcast. I did an interview with Chris. Well, listen, you want to hear something remarkable? We did 2 hours. I did not mention owls once. So
I was about to say that Chris has his own experiences with owls.
I talked to him for 2 hours only about owls.
Nice.
He had just done for your listeners, I think somewhere on my blog, for instance, you can find it there. But there's a series of YouTube videos that are long. He did these long interviews with Richard Dolan, and those are great. Richard Dolan was really a great interviewer in that, and the only way to do it, I think it's like 4.5, 5 hours.
Wow. And
maybe not quite 5, but over 4. And that's a great resource. And then I wanted to interview him. I didn't want to make him retell the same stories. I know what that feels like.
Right.
So I talked to him only about owls. And that was when I was doing the podcast for Whitley Strieber. And that is, you can find that, just look up, my show was called The Unseen. Just look up Unknown Country, The Unseen, Chris Bledsoe, and it should pop right up. And I think that's free for listening. I feel pretty strongly to say that those episodes are open for free listening. It's a membership site, but those are free. And that was only about owls. It's a great interview. Nice. Wow, does that guy have some stories?
I bet.
Yeah, Grant Cameron has discussed that a little bit as well. He's familiar with some of those encounters, the very strange owl encounters that Chris had.
And Marty, if people want to reach out to you?
Brothers of the Serpent podcast. That's where, that's my hangout. And generally on the Discord. I don't contribute on social media very much. I try to avoid it as much as possible, but I am on the Brothers of the Serpent Discord. Yeah. We have a section in there where we communicate quite a bit. And that's generally where you'll find my stuff.
All right, cool. Thank you both.
This was great. Thank you.
This was a delight. Thanks.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. I can't do this without you, so thank you for supporting the show. And know that every positive thing that comes out of this show is partially because of you. I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons who are pledging $10 or more a month. Greg Ross, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Marty Garza, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Midnight Review Presents, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Abby Allen, Cherry Trapezoid, Patricia Gayaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Billuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Corey Nelson, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Jonathan Frost, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Shurek, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda from Michigan, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Shoemaker, Mark Brady, Mark Smith, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sasha McHale, Janet's Planet, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic Podcast, Verosh K., Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Victoria, Vincent Trewell, Will Cherry, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Colin Karras, Craig Sagastumi, and Matthew Brown. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. I hope you enjoyed that. There's a Patreon segment to go along with this. If you're a patron, you'll get it soon. If you want to become a patron, it's only $3 a month. You get extra content with almost every single show, plus the show's a couple of weeks early at this point, commercial-free, and extra bonus stuff as well. I want to welcome a few new patrons. Thank you to Richard Hawkins, Christian, and Janet Shaw Binns for joining up. And thanks to Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic Podcast for jumping up a tier. Also, thanks to John from New Hampshire for a donation, which he sent me, and he recommended a series called Behind Her Eyes and said to check it out. I actually have seen that series, and it's very, very good. Totally recommend it. I don't fully remember it. I just remember really liking it. And it had a very interesting premise behind it. It's on Netflix. So check that out. I gave it an 8 out of 10 on IMDb. So yeah, I really liked that series. All right. Again, if you want to leave messages for Marty, you can do so on the Discord for the Brothers of the Serpent. There is a channel just to do that. As of this recording, I haven't heard anything new. So I know they said it was going to be a little bit of a road for him to recover. So hopefully everything's going well. See you next time.
You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.